In the early days of our marriage, Jennifer and I often found ourselves clinging to each other against the biting winds of financial strife. Our love, though passionate and unwavering, was tested by the incessant demands of overdue bills and the hollow echo of an empty pantry. Our bond, however, was not to be undone by mere scarcity. We faced each day with our hands interlocked. I still remember those nights, soft glow of a single lamp illuminating the living room of our aged home, as Jennifer and I would sit at our old oak table, planning and dreaming. Dreams, we believed, were the seeds of our destiny, and we nurtured them with every ounce of our spirit. It was during one of those nights that the idea of a grocery store was born. It was to be a modest establishment, a place that not only provided for our family, but also became a cornerstone for our community. Jennifer's entrepreneurial spirit took flight in a different, yet complementary, direction. She had a keen eye for textiles and a hand that seemed to caress fabric into yielding its utmost beauty. With the advent of the internet, she established an online store specializing in bed linens, those that promise the touch of luxury to the most humble of homes. She named it Dream Weave Linens, a name that was both a promise and a tribute to our own woven dreams. As the years unfurled, our efforts began to bear fruit. The once quiet register of my grocery store now chimed with regularity, and Dream Weave Linen's reputation for quality and beauty spread far and wide. Our financial struggles became a receding tide, leaving behind the sands of stability and comfort. Our son, Jacob, was born into this receding tide of prosperity. He was a child of laughter and light, with Jennifer's radiant smile and my stubborn chin. His early years were spent in a home filled with love, albeit one that creaked with age and begged for repair. The house, a modest structure that I had purchased in the brashness of youth, became a project of gradual transformation, much like our lives. Over time, we added rooms, one for each milestone we reached, and lovingly patched up the old ones. The renovation of our home became a family affair. Jacob, with his tiny hammer and a hard hat that slipped over his ears, was our littlest helper. He would pass me nails and beam with pride at being part of something as grand as building a house, or, as he saw it, a castle. Jennifer, meanwhile, adorned the walls with her choice of colors and the rooms with her selected fabrics, turning each corner into a soft echo of her soul. As Jacob grew, so did the house. His teenage years saw the addition of a study, a sanctuary for his thoughts and dreams. Bookshelves lined the walls, and in the center stood a desk that became the stage for his academic triumphs and occasional defeats. It was in this room that we witnessed our boy mature, his once wide and wondering eyes now sharpened with the edge of burgeoning intellect and the inevitable questions of a young man standing on the precipice of adulthood. Our home, with each nail driven and each wall painted, had become more than a structure. It was a chronicle of our lives, a tangible narrative of our struggles, our successes, our joys, and our sorrows. And as we stood on the threshold of the years that promised more joy than sorrow, more ease than struggle, we found solace in the life we had created. Yet, the story of a family is never one of stillness, for life is a river that insists on forward motion. Jacob, once our bundle swaddled in Jennifer's hand, stitched blankets, was now a young man of 19, on the cusp of carving his path in the world. His recent escapades, a party that had spiraled into the annals of neighborhood lore, were but a hiccup in the steady rhythm of our family life. Jennifer and I had looked upon the remnants of that teenage tempest with a mixture of dismay and hidden amusement. After all, were we not once young and wild? With the echoes of Jacob's teenage rebellion still hanging faintly in the air, we planned our separate journeys. I, to reconnect with the roots that had nourished my growth, and to stand in silent conversation with those who had passed beyond the veil, my parents. Their graves that held their remains were far from our current life in both distance and feeling. I longed to bridge that gap, to feel the closeness that only proximity can offer. Jennifer's excitement at her upcoming trip was palpable. she was to dive into the capital's bustling heart, to renew her spirit in the flow of fashion and friendship. Stephanie, her closest friend from university days, was an anchor of her past, a reminder of carefree days and shared confidences. Her journey promised not only the joy of reunion, but the exhilaration of reinvention through the simple act of updating her wardrobe. And so, with careful reminders to Jacob of responsibilities and trust, we stepped into our stories, unaware that the tapestry of our family was about to be threaded with the unexpected and the inexplicable. For in the chapters of life, it is not always the grand designs we plan that shape our destiny, but sometimes the small stitches that come undone. Jennifer and I parted with kisses and reminders, our familiar rituals of connection before brief separation. As I drove away, her smiling eyes and waving hand grew smaller in the rear-view mirror until they disappeared into the receding horizon. The highway soon became my companion, miles of asphalt unfurling beneath tires and windshield as I made my way homeward. My boyhood home, now an echo of the past, awaited me some 500 miles away in the undulating lands of my youth. As the lush greens of our adopted home faded into the wide swaths of corn and soybeans, I felt myself slipping into the familiar comforts of the Midwest. This was the cradle that had nurtured me, that had seasoned my life with the values of kin, faith, and rustic simplicity. I let the cruise control shoulder the burden of velocity and leaned back into the gentle embrace of memory. Images of the past flickered through my consciousness, brief frames of bygone days. I saw myself burst through the back door, my brother Andy's voice hollering after me in boyish challenge. We tumbled through the overgrown grass, wrestling with little regard for bruised limbs or grass-stained clothes. Our play was interrupted only by our mother's distant call, her voice fringed with the laughter of knowing resignation. Supper was ready. Other memories emerged like sun-dappled waters stirred from the murky depths. The earthy scent of the barn as I shadowed my father during evening chores, his rolled-up sleeves revealing the strong, gentle hands of a farmer whose touch coaxed life from the land. The scrape of the shovel into feed, the muted sound of cows contentedly chewing their cud, and the swish of milk into stainless steel echoed once again in my mind. These were the sights and sounds that scored the simple symphony of my childhood. I drove through the falling dusk, noting familiar landmarks that indicated my proximity to home. The sunset, silhouetted water tower that stood sentinel at the edge of town, the lone oak tree that bravely guarded the elementary schoolyard from errant foul balls, the church steeples that peaked above rooftops, their crosses long ago blackened by time. As I neared the old homestead, a tightness gripped my throat, the impending closeness almost palpable. Would I recognize the place that harbored my roots, or would it seem a foreign land, the bygone days now veiled by the gauze of fading memory? I turned down the dusty gravel road, each dip and curve as familiar as the creases on my palms. The tires crunched along at a slow, reverent pace. Then suddenly, there it was. The two-story farmhouse stood stately amid the gathering darkness, its windows aglow with welcoming light. My brother, judging by the rusted blue pickup truck, had arrived before me. I parked beside it and stepped out, breathing in the heavy rural air that seemed to hang in this place untouched by time. The screen door slapped shut behind me as I wiped my feet out of habit and respect. I was home. The days that followed were filled with purpose and ritual. The graves bloomed with fresh peonies, their perfumed heads bobbing in the gentle breeze of the open prairie. The stones, weathered but legible, bore the names that meant family. Johnson, my lineage and name. I lingered over the plot that held my parents, sensing their spirits keeping watch over the lands they had tilled. The creak of the windmill drew my eyes across the fields, its blades still pumping life, giving water just as they had in my youth. My brother and I also renewed our connection, taking comfort in each other's quiet company. We walked the acres together, retelling old stories with our worn and deepened voices, bridging the miles and years between us. In the quiet moments, I found myself gazing out the back porch towards the barn, its sides faded by time. I could almost see my younger self there, head full of dreams, heart flush with innocence. What would that boy, blind to the bends in the road ahead, make of this man who stood in his discarded shoes? I hoped he would recognize me as the realization of his simple wishes. A man with a loving wife, a bright son, and a full barn, who rose with the dawn's light and rested in the day's fulfillment. As the long prairie days stretched on, I felt myself slipping into the gentle rhythms of this place lost in time. Yet my phone, with its intermittent pings of Jennifer's photos and affirmations, anchored me to our present life. She stood, shopping bags dangling like hard-won trophies against the fabled urban backdrops, the sparkling expanse of Lake Michigan, the mammoth buildings that formed concrete canyons, the glowing uniqueness that was Chicago. Her embrace of the moment was infectious even from a distance. I could sense her spirit soaking in the vibrancy and fashion that fed her creative side. She was in her element, and I was happy to see her radiant smile even in pixelated form. Meanwhile, our son sent his pithy progress reports, staying alive, house still standing. Left column means no parties. Right column means parties off the hook. His humor veiled the vulnerability of a fledgling on his own. We conferred our confidence in him with a simple love you and be good. It was in the quiet dusk of a late summer night that I received the call that signaled the end of our idyls. My phone convulsed in my pocket as I sat under the faded pastoral mural of the diner, a plate of steaming meatloaf before me. Jennifer's number flashed on the screen, the 10 digits almost pulsing with urgency. Dread welled up in my gut. Something was wrong. Her breathless and panicked voice came on. "It's Jacob. There's been an accident." The details came in halting bursts amid her quiet sobs. A back road. A party, a tree. His car was wrapped around one now. No one knew how fast he was going, or if he swerved for an animal. He's alive, in the hospital now. My heartbeat hammered in my ears, the details merging into a dizzying blur. I motioned the waitress for the check and rushed to the counter, throwing down bills that I hoped would cover the uneaten meal. My hands shook, and my mouth had gone dry. I sped to the house in blind urgency, only to find my brother already loading our bags into his pickup truck. He had heard the garbled message on the machine. Jake was hurt. We needed to go home now. Tires spit gravel as we pulled onto the rural route towards the interstate. I white-knuckled the steering wheel, pressing the gas pedal closer to the floor. "Easy, Donnie," my brother said, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "We'll get there." I eased up and nodded, knowing his measured tone arose from his own hidden fear. The next hours passed in tense silence, broken only by murmured prayers and the sporadic ring of my phone. Jennifer's trembling voice provided what little news there was to offer. "Jake's in surgery. We had to cut him out of the car. He has internal bleeding, a concussion too." Her composure broke as she confessed what we both feared. "I don't know if he'll make it." I gripped the phone tighter, trying to will hope through the receiver. "He's strong, like his ma," I said firmly. "Have faith." Faith and mile markers sustained us through that long night. The painted lines blurred as I pushed the limits of speed, adrenaline, and dread coursing through my veins. I replayed my last interaction with Jake over and over, scouring for significance. Our exchanged reminders the day we left my emphasis on the responsibilities that lay in his hands alone. His reassurances tinged with teenage annoyance. Then a hug at the door, his lanky frame still not fully grown into manhood. "Love you, Dad," he had said, those parting words now amplified with sudden meaning. We arrived bloodshot and unshaven to a lobby bustling with chaos. I rushed to the desk while Andy went to find Jennifer. "Jacob Johnson." I blurted, the name feeling foreign and heavy on my tongue. "I'm his father." The nurse's eyes softened with sympathy as she pointed me down a long hallway. He's in recovery. Your wife is with him." The soles of my shoes squeaked loudly against the polished floors as I followed her directions. The sharp scent of disinfectant stung my nostrils as I scanned the identical doors for the right number. At last, room 218, the numbers loomed large in my vision. I paused, took a breath, and entered. Jennifer sat beside the elevated bed, her forehead resting on its railing. She looked up, her face streaked with tears and pale with exhaustion. I hurried over and embraced her tightly, feeling her weakened body collapse into mine. Sobs racked against my chest as she released the flood she had been containing alone. I stroked her hair until the surge eased, then turned to face our boy. What I saw knocked the breath from my lungs. His vitality, once boundless and effervescent, was replaced with unnatural stillness. His left arm was encased in plaster, while his face bore the etched markings of broken glass. Oxygen tubes strung from his nostrils like artificial tethers to life. The steady beep and whirl of surrounding machinery filled the heavy air. I staggered into the bedside chair, gripping Jake's free hand as if I could transfer my own life force through that simple touch. "Oh, son," I whispered through quivering breath, "stay with us." I raised pleading eyes to Jennifer, searching for guidance in navigating these unfamiliar waters. Her voice came softly, relating each detail of Jake's odyssey from carefree teenager to this precipice of frailty. Her account was punctuated by the entrance of doctors, who conferred in steady yet grave tones about brain activity and organ function. Their measured words came as cold comfort, for we sought a deeper assurance, the kind that comes not from man but the divine. The hours merged into days as we kept vigil by Jake's side. Nurses drifted in and out, checking vitals and clicking keyboards with somber faces. Their once cheerful chatter diminished to hushed tones in the presence of our wordless worry. Andy came too, pulling chairs up to form a circle of love, keeping watch as we took turns fetching coffee and making necessary calls. Stephanie sent her prayers and vigil from afar, her own journey interrupted by the unexpected. Late one night, as I kept my post while the others rested fitfully on vinyl couches nearby, I bowed my head and let sorrow overtake me. "It wasn't supposed to be like this, Father," I prayed through muffled sobs. "Not yet." I thought of Jake's story still unwritten that was never meant to end abruptly, left incomplete among the scattered pages of youth. Our family story, once flowing steadily on, was now dammed up by this unwanted plot twist. As I sat there, buoyed only by flickering hope, the room suddenly felt cavernous, like a great chasm had opened between what was and what should have been. I peered into that gaping space and saw the crumbling of dreams, Jake's and our own. College tours giving way to hospital beds, graduation gowns replaced with funeral garb, the laughter of grandchildren silenced before it could begin. It was all slipping away, disappearing into the void of might-have-beens. I squeezed Jake's hand tighter, attempting to anchor us both against the pull of that empty space. "Keep fighting, son," I whispered. "We're not done yet." 2 weeks passed in this fashion, our lives now measured in the slow beep of the heart monitor and the ticking of the wall clock that kept time in that place where time seemed to stand still. We celebrated each new dawn, seeing it as a conquered battle in Jake's tenuous hold on life. Then came the morning when I woke to unfamiliar sounds. The whooshing pump of the respirator had quieted, replaced by the rhythmic sound of unaided breath. The heart monitor's incessant beep gave way to the steadier language of beating hearts. I rose from my crumpled posture to see Jake stirring faintly, his head turning as if rising toward the surface from a nightmare. Relief washed over me, and I rushed to rouse Jennifer and Andy. Jake's eyes flickered open as I stroked his forehead, his parched lips cracking into a hint of a smile. "Dad," his weakened voice was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The medical team, who had entered with somber faces so many times before, now radiated optimism. Jake's healing would be measured in weeks and months rather than days, but he had crossed the threshold from the valley of darkness into the steady climb toward wellness. The weary sighs and mournful whispers that had echoed down the sterile halls gave way to the bright sound of laughter returning. Though changed, Jake's spirit burned on, defying the wind that had threatened to extinguish his flame. The pitying glances from nurses transformed into smiles of shared joy. Their crackling gossip, once hushed out of deference to us, resumed its cheerful hum. The atmosphere turned electric with renewed possibility. We passed the rest of that day enveloped in gratitude, the kind that comes only after nearly losing what you love most. Jake tired easily and spoke little, but his eyes communed what words could not convey. I left his room that night reluctantly but buoyed by new hope. With Jake stabilized, my thoughts turned to practical matters, put on hold the meals uneaten, the bills unopened, the house untended. Responsibilities beckoned, yet part of me wished to remain rooted at his bedside. My old pickup greeted me like a faithful hound as I emerged into the jarring brightness of a new day. I paused to let my eyes adjust after days of dwelling in the dim shadows of the hospital's fluorescent lights. Above me, boundless blue stretched wide. The clouds, so stuffed with portent before, now appeared as carefree shapes dotting the heavens. I breathed deeply, taking my first free lungfuls. The echoed cries of the parking garage gave way to the melodic chatter of birdsong as I pulled onto the street and made my way homeward. The simple beauty of the world now struck me as a gift rather than a given. Its splendor had been dulled by dullness of routine before. Now each detail glimmered with peaks of the divine. The amber waves of roadside grass rippled like liquid gold in the streaming sun. The quaint homes and shops that lined the downtown square seemed freshened by new possibility. And the green expanse of our lawn, though overgrown from neglect, beckoned like a forsaken friend. As I eased up the gravel drive, the old house appeared wearied from the recent torrents of turmoil and change. Paint peeled lazily from its sides, echoing the weariness I felt in my own bones. The sprouting beds of Jennifer's flowers swayed unruly in the breeze. Inside, the air hung heavy, weighted by the echoes of the words we had traded within these walls just weeks before, words of trust and promise and love. Now time-worn and unkept, this house still offered refuge. It alone had remained rooted when all else had seemed adrift. I moved slowly through its rooms, reconnecting with the familiar. Lingering traces of Jacob's presence still remained: mud, caked shoes discarded by the door, creased textbooks spread on the counter, his jacket slung over a chair. Our home had been left suspended, fixed in the moment we had rushed out, lives appended in an instant. Frozen pipes, spoiled food, and blinking lights testified to the days of neglected upkeep. I began the ritual of revival, coaxing each room back to order and purpose. As I rummaged for tools to fix a leaky faucet, my fingers grasped something soft, one of Jake's old Little League jerseys, stashed away in a bottom drawer since his glory days on the pitcher's mound. I rubbed the faded fabric between my fingers and held it up, taking in the frayed edges and juvenile number 7 centered on back. Johnson, it proclaimed boldly across the shoulders where Jake's lanky frame had once stretched the seams. A smile crept across my face as I recalled that beaming boy whooping it up with dirts. Mudged pride after each earned win. Our miracle arm Jake. I had called him back then, before life had introduced him to its knuckleball curveballs. I folded the shirt neatly and returned it to its place, nestled among other remnants of boyhood's simple dreams. The things we cling to, I thought wistfully, not just memories, but touchstones that speak to who we once were. After restoring some semblance of order, I sank into my recliner. Weariness overtook me as I settled into the well-worn grooves molded perfectly to my own shape. Something crackled beneath me as I leaned back. I fished around and extracted a crumpled sheet of notebook paper. Jacob's scribbled handwriting leapt out, and I recognized the page immediately. It was the responsibility checklist I had left him, the central crease where I had folded it serving as a makeshift parent-child contract. Most items were marked with his hurried check-offs, clear evidence of his efforts to honor our trust. A few remained blank, accompanied by his breezy margin notes, "Get to this tomorrow." I almost heard his nonchalant tone. I imagined him looking on this checklist each morning, perhaps with a sleeping head and lazy grumbles, but ultimately doing his best to put X's in the right boxes before bounding out the door to embrace another aimless summer day. The thought left me wistful again, knowing too well how life